Dear guests, I would like to welcome you to the 8th event of Boğaziçi Chronicles. Today we are here to listen to the famous anthropologist Michael Taussig, and I would like to invite him to the stage.
Can you hear me? Yeah, that's the nicest introduction I've ever had. Very functional. This is an all-over-the-place talk, and you'll soon understand why. That's an animation of my daughter's. We call it the sun gradient. And much of the talk depends upon what happens when the sun goes down, literally and metaphorically. But I want to start my talk introducing how I got to where I am right now. I'm interested in developing a strange concept that I call the mastery of non-mastery. And I see it as a sort of figure eight that never ends. Keeps on unwinding, as I call it. And I developed it. Let me get this mic working again. Just skip it on really hard, yeah. Yes. Okay. I don't know whether that was the mastery of non-mastery or just non-mastery, but anyway, we're back. We're back in session. I'll explain why I like this concept and why I think it's necessary in the following way. Several years ago, I wrote a book called My Cocaine Museum, and I found myself spending some time very excited about heat and rain and stone and mud and so forth. And I was thinking, why don't ethnographers, anthropologists, ever concern themselves with these sorts of things, like heat, for instance? Because most of them, or many of them, used to. The classic anthropology was nearly all spent in very, very hot areas. I started to think about the way the body, any body, adapts to very hot climates, and that made me also move on to my interest in color, which I know this sounds strange, came out of my interest in heat and gold and so forth. And I was interested in color not in a spectrum way, not in a semiotic way, not in a symbolic way. I was interested in how color and the human body interact. And so putting together my interest in heat and color, I started to think about unconscious aspects of bodily understanding. I call it the bodily unconscious. And I take it, for those of you who study anthropology, as a sort of novel twist to the famous essay by Marcel Mauss, the French ethnographer, in 1920s, his lecture called Techniques of the Body. So I started to get really interested in unconscious knowledge, unconscious knowing, unconscious techniques of the body in relationship to heat and then color, and so it went on as I found these sort of zones or matters which seemed to me to be more a matter of bodily unconscious knowing, not psychic unconscious, although I'm fully in agreement with that idea, but the bodily unconscious, okay? All this comes to a head with, I don't know what to call it, I don't want to be too heavy about it, a fear of global warming. And that's a very benign phrase, global warming. You know, it's like a cliche, it doesn't sound so terrible. If you veer towards the apocalyptic pole of things, you frighten people, and people seem to love the apocalypse anyway. I don't think it works. So I'll stay with global meltdown, and which I call global warming, and which I refer to meltdown, because that gives me the sense of everything sort of running away down the sink. Now, the question occurred to me, and I've got to tell you, I studied and finished medicine when I was a little younger in Sydney, Australia. So I am a bit of a wonk or a bit of a technician when it comes to certain aspects of this. I started to think, what would happen to the bodily unconscious? It's a very general question. What would happen to the bodily unconscious with global warming? That became my sort of central, more a motif than a question, really. And I started to think about death and meltdown, and I started to think, is it not true, and probably untrue as well, that with death we become aware of all sorts of new connections? That death is an event which can, I guess, close us down, thinking-wise, or can open up and see all sorts of things we hadn't seen before. So I'm wondering with global meltdown whether this isn't a time when a new type of sensibility to connections and connectedness is occurring in stops and starts, slowly and quickly. Now, this connectedness, it seemed to me, would be ultimately a connectedness with, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I know you'll all think it's rubbish, a connectedness with the cosmos, which I also translate as my body, your body, and the body of the world. So this is sort of a framework for, I guess, environmental thinking, which I'm not an environmental philosopher or anything, but I just sort of make up my own concepts. You probably know that I'm very interested in sympathetic magic. And the sort of relationships that I'm talking about with cosmos and my body, your body, and the body of the world are very much relayed through my understanding of what I call sympathetic magic. And you can ask me questions at the end of this talk, because there'll probably be all sorts of terms that you want spelled out, but I don't want to slow things up too much. This is just an introduction. As part of this changing of the bodily unconscious with global meltdown, what I think happens is that the bodily unconscious, if I can put it this way, surges into consciousness very briefly and then drops back into the body. As you feel uncomfortable, as you adapt to this situation or that physical situation, it seems to me you become sort of dimly conscious of it, and then that drops back into the unknowing, not conscious knowing part of our existence. This bodily unconscious is pretty important. I mean, it's why you sweat, why your heart goes like this, mine especially right now, blood pressure, hair stands on end, 1,000,001 things, which if you thought about, would probably, you'd probably ruin, you'd probably destroy. When you swim, when you walk, when a kid learns to ride a bike, when someone's trying to recover from a stroke, they're actually marshalling all sorts of bodily unconscious knowledge that surfaces, but in my book, my feeling is it has to drop down back into the body. So it's this rising and falling that interests me a great deal, enormously, passionately, right? And I'm thinking, well, what sort of knowledge is it that moves from an unconscious to conscious and drops into the body? I think it's a knowledge which, first off, you're following, doesn't matter who it follows, I call knowing what not to know. And you may know that I've written a fair bit on secrecy and public secrecy, and public secrecy to me seems to be very easily defined as knowing what not to know. And I regard this as a very necessary part of being a social being, a human being, if you like. That one of your prized possessions is not knowing, but knowing what not to know, okay? That's in the social field. That's because there's all sorts of things that we don't want to know or to talk about with other people for all sorts of reasons we could go into later. But this knowing what not to know is related to my way of thinking with the rising and this falling, this rising into consciousness and falling back again. Now, I wanted to add a sort of another layer to this, which is more empirical, more straightforward, not so much these interlocking concepts. And that is about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I was asked to give a talk 10 minutes long with 3 or 4 other people 3 times in a day. And it starts at 10 in the morning, and it was midday, then it was like 3 in the afternoon. I think there was a 4th talk at twilight. This happened in Southern California, in San Diego. And it was a very fascinating experience. You're standing in the beach at the start, actually, with the water coming in. No one could hear you talking. Everybody's standing, me standing, all these other people standing, the waves coming in. Then you go up to these cliffs, then you go off to these woods, you know, and so on. And then you end up in town. And I was thinking about it later on, and I thought, well, it's strange how these words fly out there. I don't know if anybody can hear them or not. And where are they going? Who's listening? And I started to think, what would it be like to, this is where you'll lose me, what would it be like to talk to the sun? What would it be like to do an ethnography of the sun? And I followed my friend Stephen Mookie and these people who do fictocriticism in Australia, which is the experimental ethnography is not about something, it's with something and to something. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. So what I'm getting at today, in my roundabout way, will be within that framework. Finally, I want to say that this notion of rising and falling, of bodily unconscious into conscious and back again, within a language, within a form of communication, say to the sun, to what you think of as non-human beings, but they have a sort of certain potential for animism, of coming alive, and that is what's involved in sympathetic magic, is what I call, amounts to what I call tremor writing. Something becomes conscious only to disappear, and it just leaves a trace. And that, as a person who spends a lot of time writing and thinking about writing, this is sort of the bottom line, this is sort of the challenge for me, as I perceive it, is to concoct language which is based on tremor. So you can see it's very ambitious, it's very all over the place, and the final aim of all of this is to contest, to engage with what the Frankfurt School Marxists, Horkheimer and Adorno, in their book, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, called the domination of nature. And it's their motif, they see from Homer onwards, the history of humankind can be seen as this desire, this need to press down, dominate, control nature, including human nature, including animals, including men dominating women, you know, the whole shtick, okay? So, I keep thinking, well, what are you going to do? I mean, there's so many ways of trying to slow that up or change it fundamentally. And what I started to think was a sort of mimetic response to the domination of nature will be the mastery of non-mastery. It's not a head-on collision. It's not a head-on engagement. It's a completely different sort of philosophical form. And that's what I want you to bear in mind. Okay, so let me start. So the third part of my introduction is to tell you that not so long ago I performed with a group of people a theatre, we call it the Sun Theatre, which was also identified as a theatre piece, pressing on ritual. So it's got all those scary aspects of ritual about it, but it's also meant to be a theatre piece, getting close to, pressing on ritual. In other words, changing the world through ritual and magical means. What else are we going to do with the theatre? I did this with a musician, Annie Rossi, a dancer, Carl Bukhari, a lighting artist, Bentley Meeker, a voice from up high, Feride Iralp, and of course my old friend the Manglewort, using the light of twilight to engage as mimetic play with the mastery of non-mastery as a counterpoint to the domination of nature, which involved a play with language and voice, and eventually a book with a right-hand side and a left-hand side to be read contrapuntally. I wanted to give you an idea of this project, which is to convert a theatre piece into a book with a left-hand side and a right-hand side. And every time you open it, you get these two pages, and they're meant to be read across one another. Originally, it was the script, theatre script, on the one side, and a commentary. And I thought that was a wonderful idea. I just found it impossible to pull off. So I got this other sort of thing, which I just flashed by you, to give you a sense of what a theatre turned into a book, one of the ways it could look like. This is in its very early stages, and it's designed by a book designer called Amy Frances Cheney. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is always has to be read through that filter. First theatre, then a book. And what I'm going to give you today is a sort of a bit of a sample, a bit of a run-through of what it might contain. I want to go back to one slide, though, one image. Oh. I think I'm going to have to ask Nehal to work this. Can you get me to the Angels Call Them Operators? Okay. It's okay. We'll go on to the. Just hold it there, and I'll take it from here. Yep. I've divided the what follows into 4 parts. First part I call Cosmos. Second part I call Meltdown. Third part I call Rastelli the Juggler. And fourthly, the Mastery of Non-Mastery. So the first part is Cosmos.
Mi történik? Azt látjuk hirtelen, hogy a hold korongja a nap lángoló gömbjét behorpasztja, és a horpadás, a sötét árnyék egyre nő és nő. És ahogy egyre jobban eltakarja, a napból lassan már csak egy keskeny sarló marad, egy vakító sarló. És a következő percben mondjuk, hogy déli 1 órakor egyszeriben drámai fordulat áll be. E pillanatban a levegő váratlanul lehűl. Érzik már? Az ég beborul, egészen besötétedik. Felvonyítanak a kutyák, meglapul a nyúl, fut a szarvascsorda, fut, riadtan menekül, és ebbe a félelmetes és felfoghatatlan alkonyatban még a madarak is megzavarodnak, és a fészkükre szállnak riadtan. És akkor Néma csend. Minden élőlény elnémul. Vajon megindulnak a hegyek? Ránk dől a mennyboltozat. Beomlik a föld. Nem tudjuk, mi lesz. Nem tudjuk, mi lesz, mert beállt a teljes napfogyatkozás.
This is a clip from a film made by Bela Tarr and Agnes Tarr called Werkmeister Harmony. In this sequence, the young man with the straw hair is getting the men in this bar to enact the cosmos. So the big guy in the middle with his hands going like this, he first has them like this, but then he's told he has to move them like this. He is the sun, then comes the moon, then the moon is told to rotate, and then come other planets, and they're all moving around in this sort of divine fashion, pretty drunk, pretty late at night. And this is my gloss. The camera is held low, the lighting greyer than grey, the slightly glazed and presumably somewhat drunk men locked in that pessimism for which Central Europe, or at least Bellis and Agnes Tarr, are famous. They take upon themselves with all the seriousness of the world this mimicry of the cosmos and of its darkness, as with the Soviet invasion, corruption, ungovernability, and the mysteries thereof. But the ferret-faced choreographer, the young fella, he's not finished, not yet. Bodies are one thing, mood is another. He speaks to the earth of boundlessness and constancy, quietude and peace, of infinite emptiness and impenetrable darkness, ending, at first we do not notice what we are witnessing. That's my bodily unconscious. At first we do not notice what we are witnessing. They survive the eclipse of the moon, light returns, a piano starts softly as the planets, later on, their arms waving slowly like prehistoric birds, slowly dance around one another as the irate barman pushes them out into the cold, dark night of closing time. Which, of course, is my motif. Yesterday, one of those days, the sub-freezing temperature shot up late spring, like late spring warmth. The snow started to melt, like a blowtorch was put to it, and the mist rose from the river like a shroud enveloping all that lay around. We walked in the mountain close to sunset, with the streams running high, stripping off our clothes. At times we spooked ourselves, disappearing into the mist like the phantoms we were. Same as happens in certain sunsets, when the light turns everything purple, with shots of yellow and blue raining like vapor from the far-off ridge where the sun sets. The craziest thing was that every few minutes we would walk through a pocket of hot air and then a minute later walk through chill. And the craziest thing was that as with the immersion in the mist, so you sense this mimetic pull into otherness, into rampant otherness of being. Tornadoes were reported further south. Yesterday, one of those days of utter perfection, early fall, it seemed like we were living in glass, the world not real, but a picture in which we held our breath. And now I quote, whenever I'm quoting someone, I'll go like this. This is Proust. One of those days filled with so many changes of weather. One of those days filled with so many changes of weather. Atmospheric incidents, storms, that the idle man does not feel that he has wasted these days because he has been taking an interest in the activity, in the weather, in which default of himself, the atmosphere, acting as it were in his stead, has displayed days similar to times of revolution or war. In which case, What happens, as Walter Benjamin puts it in The Storyteller, quote, a generation that had gone to school on a horse-drawn streetcar now stood under the open sky in a countryside in which nothing remained unchanged but the clouds. And beneath these clouds, in a field force of destructive torrents and explosions, was the tiny, fragile human body. He's referring to 1918, 1919, which is no longer true. For now, even the clouds have changed. Compare that still life, or what the French call nature morte, dead nature, with Walter Benjamin's visit to the planetarium in 1928. The ancients' intercourse with the cosmos had been different. It involved the ecstatic trance. For it is in this experience alone that we gain certain knowledge of what is nearest to us and what is remotest to us, and never one without the other. This means, however, that a person can be in ecstatic contact with the cosmos only communally. It is the dangerous error of modern people to regard this experience as unimportant and avoidable, and to consign it to the individual as the poetic rapture of starry nights. It is not. Its hour strikes again and again, and then neither nations nor generations can escape it, as was made terribly clear by the last war, meaning the First World War, which was an attempt at a new and unprecedented commingling of cosmic powers. End of quote. Modern warfare paves the way. Never has the sun been more brilliant, with the stars winking at us from the farthest reach. Now, where's Nihal? Maybe you can help me. No, you guys can share this. All right. Can you pump this up for me? And you can help him, because it's not easy. Thank you. And bring it to me when you're done. They're pumping up the sun. So, I want to go through some key words. Sun, source of life. Labor, its equivalent, creating more value than necessary for survival. Marx, surplus value. Bataille, the sun gives without receiving. Question, what to do with the excess? Now it's killing us. Sun, re-enchantment of the sun. Re-enchantment of the sun refers to the way by which global warming creates a resurgence of what Bataille and the College of Sociology called the sacred, at its ominous, sublime best. Sun, re-enchantment involves demystification combined with enchantment. Demystification is insufficient. This fits nicely with the never-ending unwinding of the need to become a thing in order to break the magic spell of things, which is how Adorno thinks of Benjamin's writing. Which is why I say now it's re-enchanted, which is why I'm saying now it's re-enchanted. Maybe we will become part of what we do not see. All the more incandescent, let us say, glowing ever brighter, ever more sinister in this our age of catastrophe. We are now becoming like the soothsayers the magicians, the future, who read the future. We are now becoming like the soothsayers of old. We are becoming like ancient stargazers each night, asking the heavens whys and wherefores. We sense our animal selves, our plant selves, our insect selves, all of that and more. As an angry sky beats down, our bodies resonant with hitherto unknown liaisons as foreign beings skid in from the unknown. Suddenly we are alive in our very bodies as to stellar influence and solar wind. And when all goes dark once more, but for fireflies, epitome of the animate world, reminders of chances missed, others to catch, roadside flares of pixelated consciousness. Space of death, another key word, drawn from my modernist warping of Dante's Descent into Hell. Thank you. Put it up here for the moment. Of Dante's Descent into Hell, bound to my interpretation of mythologies of race and conquest in Latin America. This death space is now ours in the age of meltdown, offering an assortment of positions and trajectories, pitching the reel in unaccustomed ways like a ship in a stormy sea. Magic hour. Magic hour occurs at dawn and twilight, a favoured time for making films and taking still pictures, a favourite time for the stirring of animals and hunters, night watchmen, servants and peasant women, inviting connections with the world of the dead and the yet to come. Essence of the Baroque, magic hour dissolves subjects into objects and expands with global meltdown. Beyond language, it is what sustains language with that light that continues to dazzle the eyes as yet unaccustomed to darkness. Keyword, bodily unconscious. Is the body on automatic pilot, mimetically connecting as if through sympathetic magic, my body, your body, and the body of the world, lurching from extreme to extreme? Meltdown augments, increases these connections. We call writing, and does so through knowing what not to know. Keyword, conjuring tricks. Conjuring tricks abound in nature and in language, most especially in the knowing what not to know and the mastery of non-mastery, conjuring with the bodily unconscious, in which, along with corporeal ripple, an image surfaces in a moment of danger only to disappear. Why? I wanted to find a way that felt right, connecting the human body and changes in mood with the passage of the sun each day across the sky. I was charged with the idea that in this age of meltdown, the mimetic faculty, alive in all of nature, including human nature, receives an enormous boost and much perturbation. That this mimetically sensitive body functions largely unconsciously, as in its intercourse with the sun. Rising into consciousness only to subside like the sun does across the sky on its way underground, like shamans do with their skilled revelation of skilled concealment, which is Martin Heidegger. Like the art of the bodily unconscious, mimetic trickery all the way down. Like what Proust engages with in his struggle against habit, against the deadening of our sensations because of habit. Slowing down perception is what he does. Of flowers, for example, or of Madame Swann walking in the park, into smaller and smaller Baroque parts and winding particles that they surface strangely into consciousness, only to subside where they do their best work in our readerly bodies, now subtly different to what they were before. Like what Walter Benjamin does in his thesis on history, where he states that, quote, the true picture of the past flits by, The past can be seized only as an image which flashes up at an instant where it can be recognized and never seen again. Crazy stuff. What way? Explain this to me. All these people, all on the same beat here. Which must be why Nietzsche is urged to say that what does unveil itself for us unveils itself only once. But perhaps this is the strongest magic in life. Knowing what not to know implies its opposite. I mean, suddenly becoming aware of what we knew all along but didn't know we knew. Like what happens one day late in life, you hear tell of magic hour, which is the time of the world after the sun sets, and you see then how the entire world changes because of the light in the darkening sky. What this means is not only that we move from one type of knowing to another when we become aware of what we knew but didn't know we knew. What this implies is not that only that we move from one type of knowledge to another type of knowledge. Surely that's true. But more critical and acrobatic is the strange slippage involved, a giving and a losing simultaneously, such that the body, no less than the mind that emerges, are not what we started with. We have traversed the fold and then the refold, folding back on itself, or almost so. We have traversed the figure eight that is the circuit, that is the mastery of non-mastery, and, what's more, we will keep on doing this so long as the imbalancing act continues to self-generate its figure eightness, its curly motion. That is the delight, that is the wonder, how this mechanism generates its own energy and motion because of its curious asymmetry. The figure eight curliness of the mastery of non-mastery parallels those tricks when the body, with the body involved in shamanic conjuring. It's the writing's a little small at the back, right? Can you read at the back? Okay, this is a really wonderful drawing, and it's called The Art of Mimesis, and I should have had it up the last 3 minutes, so you had two tracks going, the verbal and the visual. Underneath it says Mastery of Non-Mastery, Peasant Farm, Western Colombia, 3,000 feet altitude in volcanic soil, mimics the rainforest. So it's a farm which mimics the rainforest. It's self-nourishing, no chemicals, no irrigation, minimal labor, and underneath, sort of dramatic and poignant in this age of agribusiness, it says, still some left. This to me is a sort of a motif underlying a lot of this talk, if you like, which is the groundedness of the mimetic faculty in nature and certain agricultural activities and many others. Going back a line, this figure eight curliness of the mastery of non-mastery parallels those tricks with the body involved in shamanic conjuring. Which I see as a variant of Rastelli, the juggler, in which things talk to things, which is the name of this drawing of haystacks seen from the train, in which things talk to things as when I wend my way half asleep, with the lights off, my body a phantom, passing through corridors and doors opening into time. They call it proprioception, but my body as object communicates thus with other bodies, including the solar system. This has been going on for a while, you could say, such that whatever could be meant by the mastery of non-mastery engages with this short circuit of consciousness in the realm of bodily practice, which is perhaps why Walter Benjamin listened hard to Rastelli the juggler, telling him a story about another juggler, a famous juggler of the 18th century, whose act consisted in having a large ball bounce towards him, ascend the steps where he was seated so as to climb on his knee, then his shoulder, and eventually his little finger. You can come down the front if you want to see better. This drawing is very faint in this light. It's not clear. Perhaps Rastelli is talking about himself. There's a lot of juggling going on with this story, for sure. Just as there was a dwarf hidden inside the ball, manipulating springs to make the trick work. So all this bouncing up and down, the ball is coming, is due to a little dwarf hidden inside the ball. This is what Rastelli is telling Walter Benjamin, according to Walter Benjamin, who's a good storyteller and sometimes makes things up. Asked to perform for the Sultan of Constantinople, could have been like in this very building, who knows, or a few miles away. The act proceeded beautifully, Rastelli tells Benjamin, with the ball leaping onto the juggler's little finger. He receives his reward, his life is insured, and he walks back to the lodgings and receives a note. And the note, when he opens it, it says, "Dear Master, I am sorry, but I cannot come tonight as I am ill." In other words, the trick worked perfectly without the dwarf. This tale presents the alpha and omega of all mastery, says Benjamin, in which, quote, "the hand has, so to speak, taken the matter in hand and has joined forces with the object." The alpha and omega of all mastery, in which the hand has, so to speak, taken the matter in hand and joined forces with the object. The years of practicing juggling does not mean that either his body or the ball is in his power, but it enables the two, the person and the ball, to reach an understanding behind his back, bodily unconscious, behind his back, to weary the master to the point of exhaustion through diligence and hard work, so that as long last his body and each of his limbs can act in accordance with their own rationality, This is what is called practice. It is successful because the will, writes Benjamin, abdicates its power once and for all inside the body, abdicates it in favor of the organs, the hand, for instance.
Enrico Rastelli aus Bergamo, Inbegriff für die Jonglerie. Er trainierte 10 Stunden täglich. Rastelli starb 1931 im Alter von 34 Jahren.
The dwarf, or a dwarf, crops up again in Walter Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history, in which an analogy is made between Marxist revolution and an 18th century chess-playing automaton dressed in so-called Turkish attire. The automaton wins every match, thanks to a dwarf hidden under the chess table. Like the automaton, historical materialism will win every time, provided it enlists the services of theology, i.e. the dwarf, which is today wizened and keeps out of sight. One of the most ingenious things about this chess-winning, Orientalist, upstaging Marxist trick, please note, trick, simulacrum, dissimulation, mimesis, is the mechanism of revelation and concealment, which is what I mentioned earlier as a shamanic strategy, skilled revelation of skilled concealment. The underneath, where the dwarf was hidden, had multiple doors and compartments, such that curious onlookers could peer inside from all sides and see it as empty. Two crucial doors were concealed by the Turk's robe. One commentator regards his clothing as suggestive of an Oriental sorcerer. So, mastery of non-mastery is a shamanic conjuring of the bodily unconscious, as illustrated by masterful jugglers playing astounding tricks in which the hand joins forces with the object. One of these astounding tricks is likely to be a winning hand in history, meaning history. Another trick is the accord between eye, soul, and hand, as involved in storytelling, understood as a craft, as with Rastelli and his juggling, as with Rastelli's story about the dwarf, as with Benjamin's story about this story, no less than about the chess-playing Turk. Another trick is the role of the hand in curing illness. Quote, this is from notes of Benjamin's about a friend of his. What he said about her hands was that their movements are highly expressive, but it is not possible to describe their expression. It is as if they are telling a story. The ultimate trick, however, is not Rastelli's, but a variation with the return of the Messiah. Surfacing at a moment of danger, the angel of history is the metamorphosis of the magical dwarf. As I see it, is the metamorphosis of the magical dwarf in the German nursery rhyme, flitting through Benjamin's childhood, breaking things, eating his soup, scaring him shitless, watching him all the time, but rarely visible except when surfacing at a moment of danger. I wonder, does not this angel of history belong to that same tribe from which comes the dwarf concealed in the juggler's ball, rotating on his finger like a bird, no less than the dwarf beneath the Turk's chessboard who will win every time? And how does the Messiah present himself? In this case, by disappearing, by absenting himself from the juggler's ball. Mastery of non-mastery, my last section. Along with music, magic hour is what holds this theatre piece together. This is not easy to pull off because magic hour sounds so cheesy, like the American dream. How can we save dreaming from such a silly fate? Balzac, the realist, has this to say about magic hour. In the half-light, the physical tricks used by art to make things seem real disappear. If you like, you could think of it this way. Magic hour is a trick which cancels out the tricks that art uses. But let me use Balzac's own words. In the half-light, in the twilight, the physical tricks used by art to make things seem real disappear completely. If one is looking at a picture, the people represented seem both to speak and to walk. The shadow becomes a real shadow. The daylight is real daylight. The flesh is alive. The eyes move. Blood flows in the veins. And the fabrics glisten. At that hour, illusion reigns supreme. This is very tricky. This is my interpretation. This is not so much a description of magic hour as its practice, in which the real becomes more real and illusory at the same time. This is what so interests me about this time of day, which is in accord, of course, with this whole exercise. This must be why this time is the time when the spirits of the dead are said by many people to emerge, scaring the living. And hunters try to outwit game in the baroque shadows of reality. And why? Why are they called game? One of my propositions is that magic hour will expand with global meltdown, creating more and more of a twilight world, which I also see as a world of awakening, a world of skilled revelation and skilled concealment. No sooner is something apprehended than because of that, it shifts, it changes. Lines are replaced by moving sheets of colour, sliding over mystery. Slowly, slowly, like under glass. We become aware of new forms of being, new forms of reality, and new forms of connecting, in which the bodily unconscious surfaces, albeit briefly, into consciousness. That intense taste for life that grows and pullulates, explains Tom Conlon, meditating on the trope of the Baroque, underlying Deleuzian thought, is a fragility of infinitely varied patterns of movement, such as we might experience in watching waves heave, tumble, and atomize, when they crack along unfolding lines being traced along an expanse of shoreline. Atmospheric effects change your understanding of reality and therefore of yourself, and do so without you being aware. Does that make sense? Providing the psycho-cosmic corporeal rationale of the Sun theatre, which is actually the theatre of the bodily unconscious. Each day, with the going down of the sun, we are being given a lesson. We are being given a lesson in cosmic affairs and optics, only we don't know it. In the pre-meltdown phase of planetary history, when we dominated nature, this lesson was different to what it is now, when what was dominated now, in its crippled and pathological state, dominates us in our crippled and pathological state. In this regard, imagine the world before the sun. Imagine there is no sun. When fireflies provided what light there was, with neither the darkness of the night nor the light of the day punctuating time. Should I click it again? It should be moving. Thank you. Unlike our current passage from night to day, I want you to imagine a world without night, without day, illuminated by fireflies, which is what I learned from mythology in northern Colombia, South America. Unlike our current passage from night to day and back again, firefly light would exhibit a 24/7 flicker pattern, like that which fascinated Brian Gysin with his dream machine. How did this happen? He got the idea traveling in a bus one summer in the south of France at sunset, time of magic hour. We ran through a long avenue of trees and I closed my eyes against the setting sun, he told Terry Wilson. An overwhelming flood of intensely bright patterns in supernatural colours exploded behind my eyes, a multi-dimensional kaleidoscopic whirling out through space. I was swept out of time. What Gysin hit upon here was the combination of magic hour with fireflies. He whirled through space and was swept out of time to where the spirits of dead emerge, movies are made, and the light, as the cinematographer Nestor Almendro says, the light undergoes strange mutations. You can say that again, Nestor. Master of light, master of understatement, cinematographer for Terrence Malick's film, Days of Heaven, all shot at magic hour when the atmosphere undergoes strange mutations. Which is why we pay attention, even if we are not aware, we do, because of the enormity of the eternal recurrence of world making, world becoming, seeping into our bodies each and every twilight when the fireflies return. It is at once a political and solar event, a gift, we could say, wherein history and natural history fuse in the dying rays of cosmic energy as night creeps across the surface of the globe. What did Marcel Mauss memorably declare the gift to be? A total social fact, political, economic, aesthetic, and religious. This is the sun, giving without receiving, as Bataille puts it in The Accursed Share. Redolent, full of the after-image of sacrifice. As two men watched the sun set from a rooftop in London during the war, and I quote from Pynchon, Gravity Rainbow, they were struck a moment by the sun, not reflecting at all, but containing the same destroying light. I'm reading slowly because I think it's very difficult to come up with such a wonderfully original, uncliched awareness of sunset. Struck a moment by the sun, not reflecting at all, but containing the same destroying light, this intense fading in which there is no promise of return, light that rusts the government cars in the curbsides, varnishes the last faces hurrying past the shops in the cold, as if a vast siren, had finally sounded, light that makes chilled, untravelled canals of many streets, and that fills with the birds, fills with the starlings, of London, converging by millions to hazy stone pedestals, to emptying squares and a great collective sleep. The operators call them angels. He means the radar operators, World War II. Now let's see if I can get up what I need for you guys. I think I might need a help here. No, we go back. I want the birds, the girls in the water. No, one more. One more. Now we're going, have to go the other way. Well, no, it's second last. Keep going. More. No, keep going. It says the girls in the canoe. There we go.
Right, let's get to that island then.
I can see an animal.
Where?
I see three. I can see something flying low. I reckon it's like a coot or something. And two swans. Look up!
Oh, wow.
Yes, they're over there. Oh, and this one has amazing
So you probably want to ask me later, what do I mean showing this? What's my sense of connectedness? The sun, sunset, the starlings of London, the operators call them angels. This phenomenon, which is called, I believe, murmuration, its relationship to the human world, the animal world, this massive diurnal rhythm. And I want to end this way, quoting of all people, D.H. Lawrence, "The morning star was always a god." The one star that you see, as all the other stars disappear, there's one star that remains, Venus. "The morning star was always a god because she rules in the twilight between day and night, and for the same reason she's supposed to be lord of both, night and day. And to stand gleaming with one foot on the flood of night and one foot on the world of today, one foot on the sea and one on the shore. Dawn and twilight, favourite time for cinematography, making movies, as well as the stirring of animals, inviting connections with the world of the dead and the yet to come, sustaining language with that light that continues to dazzle eyes unaccustomed to the darkness. The filmmaker knows many things, firefly things. We ordinary mortals don't know we know. Knowing that knowing is not the same hereafter, but something else easing into the mastery of non-mastery." I'll hand it over to Nihal. See if you can get the last little bit. No, with the music, the very end, the orange, that's it, loud. Look back. Yeah, good. Yeah. From out of nowhere came a rippling sound, carrying us like chaff on the wind, so happy, so forlorn, immersing us in the river of time unwinding. The narrator's seat sits center stage, emptier than empty. Was there ever such emptiness? Yet the music rolled on with crashing waves, coloured by the sun below the horizon. Is this the scene of writing, the mastery of non-mastery, emptiness filled with the promise of more to come, rippling on and on? Here the mangelwort swings into focus, I hope. Here the mangelwort swings into focus, heavy and enigmatic, an object of unknown provenance and destiny, resembling no known shape, or rather all shapes. Heavy with the weight of the world, it comes from the sea, or rather where the sea meets the land. It is absurdly wider than white, with tiny hexagons. Hexagons like crystals that enclose smaller and smaller hexagons beyond what the eye can see. I think of it half asleep in some tide pool with shellfish stuck to it, along with wisps of seaweed floating dreamily across its face, if face it be. I have one such mangelwort living on my desk. A geophilosophy, stylish to a fault, as well as world-enhancing. In the meantime, it is also a great paperweight. Thank you. Questions, comments? I'm sorry, all the glitches. I mean, putting on a thing like this is like making your own movie. There's so many places can go wrong. Like that music at the end, that was meant to like roll in, and then the verbal description comes. It's not meant to be cut like that. I suppose you could think of it as very Brechtian, with lots of moments of alienation. You see the production process. You don't get this smooth, perfect performance. There must be lots of questions that terms that you don't quite get, or, I'd be happy to try to answer.
This is not a question, but I'm just curious whether you've heard of Asclepian dream incubators. Mm. It just made me think of the concept, because according to Asclepian medicine, there are three states.
According to what?
Asclepius, the god of medicine.
Oh, right.
There are three different states of consciousness: the unconscious state, the conscious state, and there's this dreamlike twilight state.
Oh.
They had these rooms where people used to go into a trance to figure out what was wrong with their bodies, and they treated their own selves. So I thought it was interesting in the light of what you said.
Yeah, well, hardly original, huh? But I've got Marx and Walter Benjamin and Proust and Sand Beach in San Diego. It would be so worth my reading that and thinking about it. My guess would be that much of modernity has erased those sorts of capacities. I want the mic.
Thank you for this very interesting talk. I was curious, actually I'm still not clear about how do you see global warming after all this? I mean, is it a pessimistic outlook, or are you looking forward to it?
Well, what I'm trying to do is find in what I see as 99.9% sure death of the planet is some possibility for taking that energy and turning it round. So there is something quote-unquote good in it, in that I find these seeds whereby a different relationship of mind to body, where the notion of body expands. My body is no longer only an individual body, it's your body, a body of the world, including the cosmos, all these things which would have been very embarrassing to talk about 10 years ago. So yes, it's terrible, it's a killer, but we keep on going. And my whole point is to try and find something within it. It's sort of very Hegelian, I suppose, something within this rotten force that can make things take a different path. And I've explored it through various stories and channels and images, all of them having to do with this, building up this concept of the mastery of non-mastery. Yeah, so terrible, but I'm trying to find ways in which it can be manipulated and moved around. This is not to replace ordinary, how should I put, ordinary commonsensical strategies. That it's more in the philosophical, poetical bent. It's also a type of movement that I find, for example, in various philosophers. You know, that Deleuzian quote that I read out. I mean, the Deleuze's work on the Baroque and on the fold. These things are mentioned in what I said, but I didn't want to sort of specify it out, point 1, point 2, point 3. This very curious notion of, I've never really got my fingers around in Heidegger, of truth being unconcealment, which then conceals itself. Benjamin talks about the image that flashes at a moment of danger, only to disappear. Nietzsche says the same thing about unveiling, which he says is better not to do. And so it goes on. And I don't know if you know a long article of mine called Viscerality, Faith and Skepticism, Another Theory of Magic, which is all about the same skill. What I read, Boaz, Levi-Strauss, Evans Pritchard, all these great texts on magic, it occurred to me that what is happening is the skilled revelation of skilled concealment. So these sorts of strange, exposing only to conceal once again, seem to me to mirror my guess, my understanding of the relationship between the unconscious of the body and our consciousness of that unconscious, and how important it is not to let it stay in consciousness too long. It seems to me a fantastically interesting and slightly scary aspect of all life. And so in different ways I was trying to wrestle with that. I was giving you tastes, not the full thing. But yeah, it's a very good question and it helps clarify things. I hope it gives you, it probably raises other questions for you in place of the first question.
Thank you.
We live in strange times. It's late modern capitalism of ultra-rationality. Right?
Sorry?
A lot of people talk about today as times of late modern capitalism, of ultra-rationality, big data, and everyone is like data mining. But there is this very curious irony in those times that if the entire system seems to be drawing on a belief in the market. When we don't believe in the market gets problems and depressed, like very much like our psychology, right?
You're talking about the market? The market gets depressed? Yeah.
So I don't understand how come in such ultra-rational times that belief stands at the center of our economic system. Yeah. Trust in the market, believe in the market, that, you know, people are going to be able to pay things. So when trust collapses, the entire system collapses in those ultra-rational times. So what you're telling us right now is the language of the economist, if you look from a different perspective.
Oh, really?
Of course. Everyone talks about magic. Some present it as a form of rationality, some doesn't. And sociologists and anthropologists started working on that like around quarter century ago and began to identify different forms of agency, agency of non-humans, agency of the non-living, like the atmosphere, like the thing, like the barley, and etc. But they start analyzing this phenomena from the perspective of empirical research, such as those who study financial market looks at how economics is performative of markets on the ground. So there is a way to relate to that research agenda. Yours seems to be approaching it from a different perspective of performativity, which makes it almost impossible for me to relate. I didn't know, it doesn't propose a taxonomy, it doesn't share a language of science, even in the most critical sense of the word. I don't know how to, and I love your work. You know, the magic of the state, the first three ethnographies, and we discuss it. So it seems like your new work is, you know, balls are jumping, and you know, I simply didn't know how to relate to it as a scientist. What is going on?
I think a lot of it is theatre and theatricality, right? And the problem now is, or the project now, is to turn a theatrical experience into a book-like experience, where the book becomes not like an ordinary book, it becomes an object, which is sort of performing a lot of what it's talking about. And I try to give you a sense. For instance, the different I skated through it very fast, like the different shades of blue. They're meant to indicate different types of twilight darkness and all sorts of tricks played with the color and the fonts and so on. So I think part of it is moving from the world of science to a world of, I guess you call it art, dealing with a different type of representation. That's probably the stumbling block. Why, the question then might go back, well, why did you bother putting it into theatre in the first place? Why didn't you just move on from, I guess it would be the colour book. So it had the heat stuff and then the colour, and these ideas were sort of gelling about consciousness and bodily unconscious within historical contexts and ethnographic contexts and so forth. You know, and I've tried to think back, and I can't figure out the jumps that I made, or the jump that I made into this, I guess, what seems like a very different realm. We shall see. Right now I'm working on a much more conventional sounding project, you'll be pleased to know, concerning African palm, the spread of African palm, Indonesia, Malaysia, and at the point of a gun in northern Colombia. That's another story. But even then, I already see that there's elements of this that are involved. I guess it's a step out of the science of social science into the realm of social art or something like that. I don't know. See, that's a silly way of putting it. I got very interested when I was writing the colour book in the languages of magic and ideas behind magic in the Trobriand Islands, in places I worked in Colombia, and the shamanism that I'd been involved with there, as providing an example, a model, stimuli for coming up with my own spells, my own magic. In Malinowski's famous work on magic in the Trobriand Islands, on his fieldwork around 1914-18, the magic we read about is spells that are spoken into things, into different materials. And I was wondering, well, what would that look like now? written or spoken by myself. So that's a very audacious step. And some people might think it's silly or an appropriation and all of that. But that might give you another way of connecting. That this is like, this sort of work is more like ritual, but performing ritual, making ritual and performing ritual. That's how I think of a lot of this stuff. The images which were not, and the music which accompanies this in theatre are not streamlined enough to make sort of a cohesive ritual, if you like. But there's no doubt, to my mind, that this is what underlies the whole work. It's a sort of ritual or quasi-ritual, speaking to the environment. I could go further in that direction, but you can sort of see it's not just art versus science. I mean, it's quasi-ritualistic, I would think. But not so far gone that you can't get with it, I hope. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for this imaginative, insightful presentation. I really liked it, but I will definitely read the book, but I don't know if I understood truly about this question. Can you hear me? But that I have problems with this concept of bodily unconscious, because it still gives me the glimpse that it still takes the consciousness as the sun in this conceptualization. So when we talk about bodily consciousness as revolving around our consciousness, then I took the glimpse that we still take this consciousness and the mind as some kind of conceptual sun, and also it totally reflects the movement through this mastery of non-mastery to the domain of mind and consciousness. So my first question is, did I really understood it, because I really read the book, and how can we, my question is, how can we really take the concept of sun more through the body and more through the out of this consciousness revolving around? Also, I like something like the orthos, you know the part from the to have done with the judgment of God, like the right is that the new sun passes through 7 points before blazing on the orifice of the earth. And there are 6 men, 1 for each sun, and the 7th man, who is the sun, in the row, dressed in black and red flesh. But the 7th man is a horse with a man leading him, but it is the horse who is the sun and not the man. Like like this man and the horse is something like the, I think it's like the movement between the man and the horse. And if we take the conscious as the sun, and take the conceptualization as the bodily unconscious, then we take the sun as the man and not the horse. But to have finished with the... anlatabiliyor muyum? No,
I can hear you, yeah.
Anlatabiliyorum. Okay. This is my first English question to the audience, so I will just start off. But I could answer. But thank you for this very insightful presentation and book. My question is, how can we pursue this sun to the more?
Yeah, I think one of the things I hear you saying is there's a contradiction and a paradox of using the word conscious, even if it's bodily unconscious, it still grants priority.
Why don't we use just body?
That's what I hear you saying. Apart from this wonderful image that you can evoke, I'm not sure about the contradiction and the paradoxical qualities. What I am sure about is that there's a bodily knowing. Maybe leave the word consciousness out of it. There's a type of knowledge that the body has, which is very different to conscious intellection. And it's the relationship between that I see as being changed by global warming. And my question is then, what are the effects likely to be of this tension, this new tension, if you like, between the body's knowledge of itself, other bodies, and the body of the world, and the conscious understanding of our bodies, the conscious understanding, sensing the world around us. I mean, one of the things that Proust does is trying to get you to open your eyes and be aware of your senses, be aware of the color and light and shape and sound, as well as the nuances of human behavior. Emerson, the great American philosopher, you know, is talking about, says most people do not see the sun. Most of us spend our life so dimly aware of what is going on around us in terms of bodily phenomena. So in answer to this question here, your question, one of the responses I could have added is the opening of the eyes to this more sensate understanding of the world around us. I'm also a little frightened or a little concerned. I think it's wise to point out that this bodily unconscious knowledge is surely something that pharmaceutical companies are very aware of and willing to or trying to put things on the market to manipulate it. And as a field of research, I would not like it. I don't know if it's a field of research I would like to encourage people to get into. I think it's best left alone. I don't think academics, intellectuals, or biologists should be studying this stuff. But this takes us into another field, which is what do intellectuals and biologists do with the knowledge that they find out about? Where is it going to go? Who's going to use it? And so forth. So I merely say this because I'm aware that certain types of knowledges can be very dangerous. And I would think that the knowledge of the bodily unconscious is one of those fields. We'll leave it at that. One of the reasons I thought color is so mysterious in my color book is because this realm of bodily unconscious knowledge is so unknown, and rightfully so. And that's what makes color so interesting. Everybody writes books on colors. Everybody has an article on color. You know, it's an endless problem, how to talk about it, what is it, and so on. That's partly because it belongs to this other realm that I'm talking about, this interaction between conscious and awareness and unconscious reaction. So what I pick up from your question, I'm not that worried myself about there being a contradiction or a paradox. If there is, that's fine. I'm interested in this interplay.
I'm not sure whether this will make sense, but I'll give it a try anyway. What is the difference between the concept that you're developing, bodily unconscious, and embodiment, embodied knowledge? Especially the example you gave.
I think it was the same.
Is it the same?
Yeah. I mean, you probably know this famous essay by Marcel Mauss, Techniques of the Body, Technique du Corps. I add to that essay, I throw into it the bodily unconscious as something which he didn't do. He sort of points to different cultures, different ways of embodying. And that's fine, you know, sort of comparative study of habitus. But I wanted to go further and think about how do you learn to swim? He says a French person swims different to an English person, an American nurse walks differently to a French nurse, and all that sort of stuff. So I asked the question, well, how do you learn those modes of walking? How do you learn to swim? What is that world whereby something unconscious in relationship to water? Driving a car is interesting that way. You learn to drive, your poor mother or father or driving instructor is sitting there next to you making you crazy. You're getting all sorts of conscious instructions about steering and maybe the gear lever and the speed, accelerator and so on. But then it becomes habitual and that knowledge sort of sinks into some place and you drive thinking of other things. What is the relationship between the steps that are involved in that process? Embodiment is fine. I'm happy with that. Yeah.
I'm just curious why you're aligning this bodily unconscious with connection. Because some of the examples seemed also like loops, where there could be an enclosure of the body rather than opening. So I'm curious why you did that.
Enclosing, you mean? Just tell me a little more.
Something opposite to opening, like maybe like a drive.
I see what you mean. Loops is the operative concept.
Yes.
Boy, I didn't mean to. I hope that's not built into what I'm getting at. I like the idea of exploration and newness. My goal all along, I think, was to find a language. Find a language in which the body's intercourse with the sun, as I put it, I understand as a mimetic relationship, like an animal or a flower in relationship to the sun. And I wanted to find words in any language, the language I use, English, which would be that. It's very crazy, it's very ambitious. It's, in a way, a non-starter, because language is supposed to be symbolic and have a historical and non-natural relationship between signifiers and signifieds and all that. But knowing all that, I want to stick with the language of the mimetic faculty, and I take that going back again to my interest in what I've read about magic spells and so forth, ritual, in which another language between people and things and things. That's where the story about Rastelli and the ball is so incredibly interesting to me, you know, where he talks about that works behind the practice, behind the back of the person who's practicing. You don't need the dwarf, finally. That's the situation which I would like to get to with a type of language. Everything I'm doing in this is really aimed at finding that language, but it won't be like 5 words making a sentence or 10 words making a sentence. It'll be an overall impact of a page or the work itself that comes out of theatre. I don't know. That doesn't sound too loopy to me. But I start to see what might be worrying. You just see like a cybernetic feedback system, something like that.
Or when you said, you know, habitual, or when you gave the example of the automaton or the driving experience, those examples seemed different than others. The one with the sun, for instance, where I see the communication and the opening, but I don't know. Maybe I should think about it as well.
Well, thank you for the question. When I think address your question to the concept of the mastery of non-mastery, I always often think of that sculpturally or graphically as a figure eight. I mentioned the figure eight, and it's always unwinding. It's always unwinding. It's always in motion. There's never any end point. So you could say, well, it's sort of loopy, but it never comes to closure. It's always open. So it's looping, but it's always open. And one of the figures for that is conjuring. That's why Rastelli the Conjurer, again, is interesting to me, because my, how shall I put it, strategy for thinking about the domination of nature, which is obviously like crucial to what I'm doing, is to find something within the domination of nature and twist it round through mimesis, through mirroring with a difference, you might say. But this will never be, I think of it as as anarchist thought. It will never have closure. It'll be very pragmatic, let's put it that way. There'll be a solution that will work in certain ways for certain times, for certain people. It will be found faulty. Other things will then emerge and take its place. So maybe if we go back to that goal of the mastery of non-mastery. Now there's a paradox that I like, the mastery of non-mastery. It's its very paradoxical nature, built on mimesis, unwinding without ever having closure. It's a way of being in the world, I suppose you could say. And that's where those strange motifs of becoming aware only to let the awareness drop away are so fascinating and frustrating at the same time. Why would all these thinkers that I mentioned all end up with this weird emergence and submergence type of thing? But anyway, the mastery of non-mastery, I think, would be a loop more like the figure eight. And that might be helpful in getting the energy of what you're saying and pushing it somewhere else.
My background is in cognitive psychology, so I'm listening to you, memory, and I try to translate the concepts that you mentioned into our language, procedural memory, etc. And now that we're coming back to the mastery of non-mastery, this what we call this incredible bodily intelligence that after the cognitive science revolution, when all this, these developments in robotics and so on came about, robotics, robots, yes. What was so shocking was that, and humbling, was that while all computer technology and so on was incredibly well in surpassing the human mind, in terms of the knowledge store, the speed of computation, etc., it was very back, and it's still very behind in terms of this intelligence of the body. So you have like still these robotics, football, soccer games, and it's just ridiculous. And it's still ridiculous because these robots still cannot play football, soccer, because it has been very difficult, and it's still very difficult for computational science to imitate this intelligence of the animal body. Thank you. So
but you're doing what I was paranoid about. You're studying the bodily unconscious.
No.
You be careful. The vice rector is here. This is a very dangerous field. It's like genetic engineering.
And I was thinking of, you know, in this modernity that we're living, how less and less we experience this incredible intelligence of the body, what we call procedural memory, this acquisition.
You call it procedural memory?
Memory, yes.
Procedural.
Yeah, it's a terrible
Does that
term.
help you at all
I prefer
Don't
your
call
terms.
it the bodily unconscious. Call it procedural memory.
I prefer it, but I love actually bodily knowledge more than bodily unconscious. So I do agree with our student. But anyway, this bodily knowledge, bodily intelligence, and in this time that we're now living, in this modernity, for instance, in earlier times, you have to go somewhere. So let's take the Neolithic age. You do agriculture, and still your body starts learning certain walks. You have to go from somewhere to another place. The streets are not, there are no streets yet. So everything is bumpy and so on. And the body has to learn how to climb up the hills just like the goats. But now we are totally deprived of revering this mastery of the body, because it's now, you have a bus, the streets. In Istanbul still we have it because the sidewalks, you might have noticed. But it's like, oh, there's a hole here. It has to be immediately cleaned. Oh, the sidewalk is not good, etc. So it's like we're more and more deprived of allowing our bodies to overcome the challenges of the environment, of the natural environment. So this is a terrible alienation. So I really like where you're trying to get to.
Tell me something about these robots. You know, people. No, I mean, people. I would assume that robots have great bodily knowledge. Why is it that it's such a problem?
It's too complex. It's this this parallel processing of an infinite amount of information, and since it's infinite, we still don't know. All the pieces of information that are fed in to be processed are still limited, because we cannot grasp infinity, but the body grasps it.
You make it sound as if...
so I like your idea of, certain things never be discovered by science. I also say it in class. I really want certain things to stay dark and not be mastered. Sorry, you were saying something.
That's a... that's a big challenge to the notion of enlightenment.
We're teaching anti-enlightenment here.
Would you think then that this bodily knowledge or procedural memory is more of a challenge to the computer than the rational mental process?
Tremendous difference.
Yeah.
And this has been shocking people in the 60s, and we're now in 2015. And it's still, there's this big cleft. And as you said, animals, non-human animals, their bodily intelligence is much higher than we living in this civilization. I totally agree.
Well,
we lose that intelligence.
I'm so grateful.
So now there's a trend to go back to that.
I'm so grateful for your contribution. I mean, those of us who... how shall I put it, work socio-critically, to me the great thinker on this is Nietzsche. I mean, there's so many passages in Nietzsche where he's pulling his hair out on this very issue and saying, why is it that we've attributed so much importance to language and to intellection? Yeah, as if this other huge domain of knowing exists. And he goes on and on and on, but you can tell he's really like bashing his head against the wall. And it seems, when you read it, it seems so sinful, it seems almost like a crime what he's saying. And when he gets stuck into language and sees language, and he's such a beautiful writer, and he sees language as an enemy of this, oof. It's a very good place to start. Well, it's just such fun. What you have to say, it must be great to be in your class. Yeah.
Dear guests, thank you for your attending, and dear Taussig, thank you for telling us what we already knew, but didn't know that we knew. and we hope to see you again in another beautiful event. Thank you all.
Thank you.